What if everything you thought you knew about being ordinary was a lie? What if the universe's most feared predator species had been watching you your entire life, waiting for the right moment to claim you as their own? Marcus Chen thought his biggest problem was passing algebra and avoiding the school bullies. He never imagined that his strange ability to sense danger, his uncanny reflexes, and his inexplicable urge to protect others weren't just quirks of human nature. He didn't know that halfway across the galaxy, the HFY, apex predators who had conquered star systems and made entire civilizations tremble, called these traits something else entirely. They called them family. When the galaxy's most ruthless hunters discovered that a species they'd written off as weak prey had somehow produced one of their own, everything changes. For Marcus, for Earth, and for a universe that's about to learn why humans don't just survive, they thrive. This is the story of how an ordinary teenager from California became the bridge between two species, and how humanity's greatest strength isn't their technology or their numbers, it's their ability to turn even the most unlikely enemies into family. Marcus Chen had always known he was different, though he could never quite put his finger on how. It wasn't the way his eyes seemed to catch movement in his peripheral vision before anyone else noticed, or how he instinctively stepped back from corners just seconds before someone rounded them. It wasn't even the strange tingling sensation that ran down his spine whenever danger was near, a feeling he'd learned to trust after it had saved him from 3 separate car accidents and one particularly aggressive stray dog. What made Marcus different was simpler and more complicated than all of that. While other kids his age spent their time complaining about homework, gossiping about crushes, or planning their weekends, Marcus found himself drawn to stories of survival, strategy, and protection. He devoured documentaries about apex predators, studied military tactics in his free time, and had an odd habit of positioning himself between perceived threats and anyone he cared about. His friends called it paranoia, his teachers labeled it anxiety. His parents, David and Lisa Chen, had spent the better part of his 16 years dragging him to therapists who prescribed everything from meditation to medication. None of it worked because none of them understood that Marcus wasn't broken. He was exactly what he was supposed to be. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in suburban San Diego. Marcus woke at 5:30 a.m. without an alarm, his internal clock as precise as it had always been. He completed his usual routine, 200 push-ups, 300 sit-ups, a 5-mile run through the neighborhood while most people were still asleep. His parents had long since stopped questioning this ritual, though he caught them exchanging worried glances sometimes when they thought he wasn't looking. After his shower, Marcus stood in front of his bedroom mirror, studying the reflection that had been causing him confusion for months. At 16, he stood 6 feet tall, with a lean but muscular build that seemed to have appeared overnight. His black hair fell in unruly waves that no amount of product could tame, and his dark eyes held an intensity that made adults uncomfortable and his peers keep their distance. But it was the scars that troubled him most. Thin, pale lines across his knuckles and forearms that he couldn't remember getting, marks that looked almost intentional, almost ritualistic. "Marcus, breakfast!" his mother called from downstairs. He pulled on his Jefferson High sweatshirt and jeans, grabbed his backpack, and headed down to the kitchen where his parents were engaged in their morning ritual of pretending everything was normal. His father sat at the kitchen island, reading the news on his tablet while nursing his second cup of coffee. His mother bustled around the kitchen, preparing a breakfast that could feed a family of 6 despite there being only 3 of them. "Sleep well?" Lisa asked, not looking up from the eggs she was scrambling. "Yeah," Marcus replied, though they both knew it was a lie. He hadn't slept well in years. His nights were filled with dreams of vast starfields, massive ships that moved through space like predators stalking prey, and a constant gnawing sense that he was supposed to be somewhere else, doing something important. David looked up from his tablet, concern etched across his weathered face. "Son, your mother and I have been talking. We think maybe it's time to consider that boarding school we discussed." "The one in Colorado with the wilderness program?" Marcus paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. They'd been having this conversation in various forms for months. His parents were convinced that his intensity, his need for physical challenges, and his growing restlessness were signs that he needed a different environment. They weren't wrong, exactly, but they also had no idea how right they were for all the wrong reasons. "I'm fine here," Marcus said, keeping his voice level. "Senior year starts in a few months. I'd rather graduate with my class." Lisa turned from the stove, her expression softening with the particular brand of maternal worry that had become increasingly common. "Sweetheart, we just want what's best for you. You've been so intense lately. More than usual, I mean. And those dreams you've been having." "I don't want to talk about the dreams." Marcus cut her off, perhaps more sharply than he intended. The dreams were getting worse. More vivid, more detailed, more real. In them he wasn't Marcus Chen, awkward teenager from California. He was something else entirely, something with claws and fangs and an understanding of violence that should have terrified him, but felt as natural as breathing. In the dreams, he hunted through corridors of metal and glass, stalked prey across alien landscapes, and felt a sense of belonging that he'd never experienced in waking life. The worst part wasn't the violence or the alien settings. The worst part was how right it all felt. His phone buzzed with a text from his best friend Jake. "Dude, did you see the news? Another one of those weird satellite things crashed in Nevada." Third one this month. Marcus frowned, pulling up the news article Jake had linked. For the past 6 months, strange objects had been falling from space with increasing frequency. The government claimed they were defunct satellites or space debris, but the objects in the grainy photos looked too organic, too purposeful. They reminded Marcus of something from his dreams, though he couldn't quite place what. "I have to get to school," he said, standing abruptly and grabbing his backpack. "Marcus." His father's voice stopped him at the kitchen door. "We love you, son. Whatever's going on with you, whatever you're dealing with, we're here for you. You know that, right?" The sincerity in David's voice made Marcus's chest tighten. His parents were good people, kind, patient, understanding. They deserved better than a son who felt like a stranger in his own skin, who dreamed of hunting and killing and conquest. They deserved a normal kid who wanted normal things. "I know, Dad. I love you guys too." The drive to Jefferson High took 15 minutes through tree-lined streets where every house looked almost exactly like every other house. Marcus had grown up in this neighborhood, played in these parks, walked these sidewalks thousands of times. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like a cage that was getting smaller every day. He parked his beat-up Honda Civic in the student lot and was walking toward the main building when the feeling hit him. It started as it always did, a cold prickle at the base of his skull that spread down his spine like ice water. Danger, close. Immediate. Marcus spun around, his eyes scanning the parking lot, the street beyond, the sky above. Other students walked past him, chatting and laughing, completely oblivious to whatever threat had triggered his internal alarm system. He'd learnt not to try to explain these moments to others. They never felt what he felt, never saw what he saw. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't the only one who noticed. Across the parking lot, leaning against a black SUV that definitely didn't belong to any student or teacher, was a woman. She was tall, easily 6'5", with pale skin, silver hair, and eyes that seemed to catch and reflect light like a cat's. She was beautiful in the way that dangerous things were beautiful, all sharp edges and controlled power. She was also staring directly at him with an expression of recognition that made Marcus's blood run cold. Their eyes met across the distance, and Marcus felt something shift inside him. The world seemed to slow down, colors became more vivid, and every sound sharpened to crystal clarity. The woman smiled, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp to be entirely human. Then she lifted one hand and made a gesture, thumb and forefinger pressed together, then separated in a quick flicking motion. It meant nothing to Marcus's human mind, but something deeper, something older, recognized it immediately. "Found you," the gesture said. "Come home." Marcus took a step backward, then another. The woman didn't move, but her smile widened. Behind her, the SUV's tinted windows rolled down, revealing 3 more figures. They were just as tall, just as pale, just as predatory. One of them leaned forward, and Marcus caught a glimpse of markings on their neck, geometric patterns that looked like they'd been carved into the skin. "Marcus!" Jake's voice cut through his paralysis. "Dude, what are you doing? You look like you've seen a ghost." Marcus blinked, and when he looked back toward the SUV, it was gone. The parking lot looked exactly as it had when he'd arrived, crowded with students, teachers, and the usual collection of beat-up cars and SUVs that belonged to a suburban high school. There was no sign of the tall woman or her companions. Marcus started, then stopped. How could he explain what he'd just seen without sounding crazy? "I thought I saw something." Jake followed his gaze, squinting against the morning sun. "Saw what? Never mind. Just never mind." But as they walked into the school, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed. The woman in the parking lot had recognized him, had known him, and despite every rational thought in his head telling him to be terrified, a part of him, a part that was growing stronger every day, had wanted to walk over to that SUV and get in. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of classes Marcus couldn't focus on, and teachers whose voices seemed to come from very far away. During lunch he sat with Jake and their usual group of friends, picking at a sandwich he couldn't taste while half listening to conversations about movies and parties and all the normal things that normal teenagers cared about. "Earth to Marcus," said Sarah, a girl he'd known since middle school who had been trying to get his attention for the better part of 2 years. "You're even more spacey than usual today. Sorry, just tired." "Bad dreams again?" Jake asked, and Marcus winced. He'd made the mistake of mentioning his unusual sleep patterns to Jake months ago, and his friend had never let it drop. Something like that. It was true, in a way. The dreams were getting stronger, more frequent, more real. Last night, he'd dreamed of flying through space in a ship that moved like a living thing, hunting something across star systems, with a crew that felt more like family than anyone he'd ever known. He'd woken up with the taste of metal in his mouth and the absolute certainty that somewhere out there people were looking for him. People who weren't entirely people. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, and Marcus gathered his things with relief. He had chemistry next, then American history, then he could go home and try to make sense of what was happening to him. Maybe he'd research those satellite crashes Jake had mentioned. Maybe he'd see if there were any other reports of strange vehicles in the area. He was walking down the hallway toward the science wing when he saw her again. The woman from the parking lot was standing at the far end of the corridor, near the emergency exit. She'd changed clothes. Instead of the dark casual wear she'd worn outside, she now wore what looked like a form-fitting uniform made of some material that seemed to shift between black and deep purple in the light. The geometric markings Marcus had seen on her companion were visible now, on her neck and hands, etched in silver that seemed to glow faintly. She wasn't trying to hide. If anything, she seemed to be making herself as visible as possible. Other students walked past her without seeming to notice, but Marcus could see her perfectly. She raised one hand again, this time making a different gesture. A quick tap of her fingers against her palm that somehow conveyed urgency. "Now," the gesture said. "It's time." Marcus stopped walking. Around him, students continued to flow past, chatting and laughing and living their normal lives. None of them saw what he saw. None of them felt the pull that was drawing him toward the emergency exit like a fish on a line. He took a step forward, then stopped. This was crazy. He didn't know this woman, didn't know what she wanted, didn't know anything except that she was dangerous, and she was here for him. The smart thing to do would be to turn around, go to chemistry class, pretend this wasn't happening. But the part of him that had been growing stronger every day, the part that dreamed of stars and ships and hunting, wouldn't let him turn away. That part of him recognized the woman in the hallway the same way it recognized the gestures she made, and the markings on her skin. That part of him wanted to go home. Marcus looked around the hallway one more time, taking in the familiar sights of Jefferson High, the scuffed linoleum, the dented lockers, the motivational posters that had been hanging there since he was a freshman. This had been his world for the past 4 years. Safe, predictable, normal. Then he started walking toward the emergency exit. The woman smiled as he approached, and up close, Marcus could see that her eyes weren't entirely human. The irises were too large, too bright, and when she blinked, it happened just a fraction of a second slower than it should have. "Hello, Marcus," she said, and her voice carried an accent he couldn't place, something that made the English words sound like they were being carefully translated from another language. "My name is Kitara. I've been looking for you for a very long time. Who are you?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer would change everything.
"I am Kethva. Kithara. Kithara," said simply.
"And so are you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd never heard the term before, but something deep inside him recognized it, accepted it, claimed it. Kethva. Whatever that meant, whoever they were, it felt more true than anything else he'd ever been told about himself. "That's impossible," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were a lie. Kithara reached into her uniform and pulled out what looked like a small, crystalline device. When she pressed one side, it projected a holographic image into the space between them. A star map showing a portion of the galaxy Marcus had never seen before. "This is the Kethvar Imperium," she said, gesturing to a cluster of systems marked in silver. 300 worlds, each one claimed through strength, strategy, and the hunt. We are apex predators, Marcus. We have no equals in this galaxy. She pressed another section of the device and the hologram changed. showing what looked like a massive space station surrounded by ships that dwarfed anything Marcus had ever seen in science fiction movies. This is the Nexus, heart of our territory and home to the greatest hunters in known space. It's also where you were born. Marcus stared at the hologram, feeling the world tilt around him. That's not possible. I was born here. In San Diego. I have a birth certificate, medical records. You have very good false documentation, Kithara interrupted gently. Created 16 years ago when it became clear that Earth was not yet ready for contact with our people. Your parents, your adoptive parents, are good people who were chosen specifically for their ability to care for you until you were old enough to choose your own path. Choose what path? Kithara gestured to the hologram again, and this time it showed images that made Marcus's breath catch. HFY warriors in action, tall, powerful beings moving with lethal grace through what looked like combat scenarios. They fought with technology Marcus couldn't understand and strategies that seemed to blur the line between art and violence. The path of the hunter, Kithara said. The path you were bred for, trained for, destined for since before you drew your first breath. Marcus felt something inside him respond to the images, something that had been growing stronger with every passing day. The dreams, the restlessness, the constant feeling that he was supposed to be somewhere else. It all made sense now. Why now? He asked. Why come for me now? Kithara's expression grew serious. Because the galaxy is changing, Marcus. There are threats emerging that even the HFY have never faced before. And because you are not just any hunter, you are the son of Vexstar, High Commander of the Nexus Fleet, and the most feared warrior in our history. The name hit Marcus like a thunderbolt. Vexstar. He'd never heard it before, but something in his DNA seemed to recognize it, claim it, wear it like armor. My father? Your father, who has been searching for you since the day you were taken from the Nexus. Your father who has waited 16 years for you to grow strong enough to reclaim your birthright. Kithara pressed the device again, and the hologram changed one final time. This time it showed a single figure, tall, imposing, covered in the same geometric markings that decorated Kithara's skin. The being in the image had Marcus's eyes, his build, his stance. But where Marcus was still growing into his potential, this figure radiated a power and presence that made the air itself seem to bend around him. This is Vexstar, Kithara said quietly. This is your father, and he's waiting for you to come home. Marcus stared at the image for a long moment, feeling pieces of himself clicking into place like puzzle pieces he'd never known were missing. The dreams, the instincts, the constant feeling of being in the wrong place, all of it made sense now. What if I say no? He asked. Though they both knew what his answer would be. Kithara smiled, and for the first time, it looked genuinely warm rather than predatory. Then you continue living as you have been. Human, safe. But I don't think that's what you want, is it, Marcus? I don't think it's what you've ever wanted. She was right. Standing in the hallway of Jefferson High, looking at images of a life he'd never known but somehow remembered, Marcus felt more himself than he had in 16 years of pretending to be human. If I go with you, he said slowly, what happens to my parents? To my life here? Your adoptive parents will be told that you've been accepted to a special program, which is true, in its way. They'll be proud of you, and they'll never be in danger because of who you are. As for your life here, Kithara gestured around the hallway, taking in the lockers and fluorescent lights, and everything that had defined Marcus's world for so long. That was never really your life, Marcus. It was a holding pattern until you were ready for your real life to begin. Marcus nodded slowly. He'd known it was true long before Kithara had appeared in the parking lot. He'd been waiting his entire life for something, and now he knew what it was. When do we leave? He asked. Kithara's smile widened, showing those slightly too sharp teeth again. Now, the ship is waiting, and your father has been patient long enough. As they walked toward the emergency exit together, Marcus felt the last pieces of his human life falling away. He was no longer Marcus Chen, anxious teenager from suburban California. He was something else entirely, something that had been sleeping for 16 years and was finally ready to wake up. Behind them, the hallways of Jefferson High continued their normal rhythm. Students and teachers going about their daily routines with no idea that one of their own had just discovered he was never really one of them at all. The emergency exit led to a small courtyard behind the school, and waiting there was the black SUV from the parking lot. But as Marcus approached it, he realized it wasn't an SUV at all. It was something else entirely. something that had been disguised to look like human transportation. As Kithara placed her hand on what appeared to be a door handle, the entire vehicle shimmered and revealed its true form. It was sleek, organic-looking, with surfaces that seemed to flow like liquid metal. It was beautiful and terrifying and utterly alien. "Welcome to your real life, Marcus Chen," Kithara said as the ship's entry hatch opened with a soft hiss. "Welcome to being Kethvar." Marcus took one last look at the school building where he'd spent the last 4 years pretending to be human. Then he stepped into the ship and began the journey to discover who he'd always been meant to be. The interior of the Kethvar ship was unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined. The walls seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic light that reminded him of a heartbeat, and the surfaces felt warm and organic beneath his fingertips. Everything was designed for beings much larger than humans. The corridors were wider, the ceilings higher, and even the seating was scaled for people of Kithara's impressive height. "This will be strange at first," Kithara said, as she led him through a corridor that curved gently upward. Kethvar ships are grown rather than built. They're living entities, in a way, partners rather than mere transportation. Marcus reached out to touch the wall, and he could swear he felt it respond to his touch, warming slightly under his palm. Grown? From Nexus Coral, a living material that forms the basis of all our technology. Your body will recognize it soon enough. Kethvar and Nexus Coral have evolved together for thousands of years. They entered what appeared to be the ship's bridge, though it bore no resemblance to the sterile, control panel-heavy command centers Marcus had seen in human science fiction. Instead, it looked almost like a natural cave, with flowing surfaces that contained embedded crystalline nodes. 3 other Kethvar were present, each one as tall and imposing as Kithara, each one wearing the same form-fitting uniforms with geometric markings. "This is Marcus," Kithara announced, and the others turned to study him with expressions of intense curiosity. The closest one, a male with silver markings that seemed to shift and flow across his dark skin, stepped forward. "I am Zephyr," he said in the same carefully translated English that Kithara used. "I served under your father during the Periphery Wars." "You have his stance." Marcus felt a flush of pride at the comparison, though he wasn't entirely sure why. "The Periphery Wars? A conflict that ended 12 years ago," explained another of the crew. This one, a female with golden markings that formed intricate spirals along her arms. "Your father led 3 strike forces against the hegemony. It was magnificent." The way she said the word magnificent made it clear that for the Kethvar, warfare was not just a necessity, but an art form. Marcus found himself wanting to know more, wanting to understand the strategies and tactics his father had used, wanting to see those battles for himself. "His bloodlust is awakening," observed the 3rd crew member, an older male whose markings had faded to pale silver with age. "See how his pupils dilate when we speak of combat, how his breathing changes." "The human conditioning is already breaking down." Marcus touched his face self-consciously. He hadn't realized his body was betraying the excitement he felt when they discussed warfare and conquest, but they were right. Something inside him was responding to their words, something that felt eager and hungry and ready for action. "It's natural," Kithara assured him as she gestured for him to take a seat in what appeared to be a chair grown from the same organic material as the ship itself. "You've spent 16 years suppressing your true nature. Now that you're among your own people, those instincts are reasserting themselves." The chair molded itself to his body as he sat, and Marcus felt a moment of vertigo as systems he couldn't understand began to interface with his nervous system. Suddenly, he could feel the ship around him, its movement through space, its life signs, even its emotional state, which seemed to be one of eager anticipation. "We're in atmosphere," Zephyr announced, though he wasn't looking at any instruments that Marcus could see. "Translation to deep space in 3 minutes."
"Translation?" Marcus asked.
"Jump to hyperspace," Kithara explained. "The journey to the Nexus will take approximately 30 hours at maximum acceleration. Time enough for you to begin understanding what you are." As if responding to her words, the ship shuddered slightly, and Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if reality itself was stretching around them. Through what he assumed were viewports, though they looked more like transparent sections of the ship's living hull, he could see Earth falling away below them. The blue marble of his birth world grew smaller and smaller, until it was just another point of light in the vast darkness of space. He should have felt sad, Marcus realized. He should have been thinking about his parents, his friends, the life he was leaving behind. Instead, he felt exhilarated. For the first time in his life, he was moving in the right direction. Tell me about my father, he said as the ship completed its transition to hyperspace and the stars outside became streaming lines of light. The effect on the crew was immediate. All four HFY straightened, their expressions shifting to something that looked like reverence mixed with fierce pride. Vextar is the greatest hunter our people have ever produced, Zephyr began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting a legend. He earned his first kill at the age of 7, led his first hunt at 14, and commanded his first fleet by 20. He has never lost a battle, never failed a hunt, never shown mercy to those who threaten the HFY. He conquered the hegemony single-handedly, added the female with golden markings. 3-star systems, 47 worlds, billions of enemies. He walked into their capital city alone and challenged their entire military hierarchy to single combat. And won, finished the older male. One by one, he defeated their champions until their government surrendered unconditionally. It took him 6 hours. Marcus felt something stir in his chest. Pride, excitement, and something else. Something that whispered that these were the kinds of achievements he was meant to pursue. The kind of legacy he was meant to build. But he gave it all up when you were taken, Kithara said quietly. Stepped down from active command, handed over his fleets to subordinates, and spent every waking moment searching for you. For 16 years, the greatest warrior in HFY history has had only one mission, bringing his son home.
The weight of that revelation settled over Marcus like a heavy cloak.
Somewhere out there was a man, his father, who had sacrificed everything for the chance to see him again. A man who had conquered star systems, but considered his greatest failure the loss of his child. Why was I taken? Marcus asked. What happened? The crew exchanged glances, and Marcus sensed there was more to the story than they were comfortable sharing. There was a faction within the HFY hierarchy that believed our people had grown too insular, Zephyr finally said.
They thought we needed to understand other species better, to study how they raised their young, how they developed their warriors.
You were selected for an experimental program. They stole me. They saved you, Kithara corrected firmly. The faction that took you believed that exposure to human development methods would make you stronger, more adaptable than traditional HFY training. They were right. Marcus frowned. How can you know that? Because you survived 16 years among a species that should have been prey, the older male explained. Because you maintained your hunter instincts despite being raised by herbivores. Because you're sitting here now, ready to claim your birthright, instead of broken by the experience. It was a disturbing way to think about his human parents and friends, but Marcus found he couldn't entirely disagree. There had always been something fundamentally different about him, something that set him apart from other humans in ways that went deeper than personality or interests. The faction was led by your uncle, Kithara added, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. Your father's brother Zirian. He believed he was acting in your best interests. Where is he now? Dead. Zephyr said simply. Your father killed him when he refused to reveal your location. It was necessary. Marcus absorbed this information without the shock or revulsion he probably should have felt. Instead, he found himself nodding in understanding. If someone had taken his child and refused to return them, you would have done the same thing. The thought should have disturbed him more than it did. You're adapting quickly, Kithara observed, and there was approval in her voice. Most HFY children require years of training before they can think strategically about violence. Your human upbringing may have suppressed your instincts, but it also seems to have compressed your development cycle. What do you mean? HFY mature slowly, the golden-marked female explained. We spend decades learning to hunt, to fight, to lead. But you've had to develop survival instincts in a hostile environment. And make no mistake, birth was hostile for someone of your nature. You've essentially completed an advanced training program without realizing it. Marcus thought about his years of feeling out of place, of struggling with impulses he couldn't understand, of dreaming about violence and conquest while trying to fit in with humans who valued cooperation and peace. It had felt like torture, but apparently it had also been the most intensive warrior training program imaginable. Tell me about the Nexus, he said, wanting to change the subject away from his own development. Tell me about home. The effect was immediate. All four HFY began speaking at once, their voices overlapping with enthusiasm as they described the heart of their civilization. The Nexus is a fortress city built into an asteroid the size of a small moon, Zephyr began. It moves through space freely, never staying in the same system for more than a few years. The architecture is grown from living coral, added the golden-marked female. Every surface can be reconfigured. Every passage can be sealed or opened according to need. It's as much a weapon as it is a home. Everything's bare sea grand. 3 million inhabitants, said the older male. All warriors, all hunters, all dedicated to the expansion and protection of HFY territory. And at its heart, Kithara finished, is the great arena, where the greatest hunts are planned and the greatest victories are celebrated. That's where your father waits for you. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to imagine it. A massive space station filled with beings like himself, all of them living for the thrill of the hunt and the glory of battle. It should have sounded horrifying to someone raised among peaceful humans. Instead, it sounded like paradise. What will be expected of me? He asked. When I arrive, I mean. What's my role? That depends on what you choose, Kithara said carefully. You are the son of the High Commander, which grants you certain privileges and responsibilities. But you must prove yourself worthy of them. How? The same way every HFY proves themselves, Zephyr said with what might have been a smile. Through the hunt. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What kind of hunt? That will be determined by your father, the older male explained. Traditionally, young HFY are sent to claim their first territory, usually a small outpost or minor world, but you are not a typical young HFY. The rumors say your first hunt will be something unprecedented, the golden-marked female added, her eyes bright with excitement. Something worthy of the son of Vextar. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, feeling the ship's organic systems respond to his increased heart rate and adrenaline levels. What kind of rumors? The crew exchanged glances again, and Marcus got the sense that they were debating how much to tell him. There are whispers, Kithara finally said, of a new threat emerging from the galactic core, something that has already consumed 3 star systems, and shows no signs of slowing down. Something that even the HFY have never encountered before. And some say that your father has been waiting for your return not just because he missed his son, but because he believes you may be the key to defeating this new enemy. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Why would he think that? Because, Zephyr said quietly, the enemy doesn't seem to be entirely organic. They're part machine, part biological, part something else entirely. And you, Marcus, are the only HFY who has ever lived successfully among a species that relies heavily on technology. Your hybrid upbringing may have given you insights that purebred HFY lack, the older male added. The ability to think like both a hunter and prey, to understand both organic and technological warfare. Marcus sat back in his chair, processing this information. He'd thought he was just going home to meet his father and claim his birthright. Now it sounded like he might be walking into the middle of a galactic war where he was expected to be some kind of secret weapon. The prospect should have terrified him. Instead, he felt a fierce surge of anticipation. This was what he'd been waiting for his entire life. Not just the chance to be among his own people, but the chance to prove himself worthy of them. How long until we reach the Nexus? He asked. 28 hours, Kithara replied, checking something on a crystalline display that had emerged from her chair's armrest. Time enough for you to complete your preliminary education. Education? HFY history, culture, language, combat techniques, and strategic thinking, Zephyr explained. You'll need to understand your people before you can lead them. I'm going to lead them? You're the son of Vextar, the golden-marked female said, as if that explained everything. Leadership is in your blood. Marcus nodded slowly, feeling the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. He'd spent 16 years feeling like he didn't belong anywhere, and now he was being told he was destined to lead one of the most powerful warrior cultures in the galaxy. Where do we start? He asked. Kithara smiled, showing those predatory teeth again. With the most important lesson any HFY can learn. She stood and moved to what appeared to be a blank wall, placing her palm against it. The surface responded immediately, revealing an armory filled with weapons that looked more like works of art than instruments of war. She selected a blade that seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as the ship's control systems, its edge glowing with contained energy. The lesson, she said, offering him the weapon, is that there is no greater truth in the universe than the truth revealed in combat. Everything else, diplomacy, negotiation, compromise, these are luxuries for species that can afford weakness. The HFY cannot and will not. Marcus took the blade, feeling its weight and balance. It felt perfect in his hands, as if it had been made specifically for him. Which, he realized, it probably had been. Your first lesson begins now. Kithara announced, drawing her own weapon from the armory. Show me what 16 years among humans has taught you about survival. Marcus felt something shift inside him as he raised the blade, something that had been sleeping for his entire life finally awakening. The careful, peaceful, diplomatic boy that David and Lisa Chen had raised was falling away, leaving behind something older, hungrier, and infinitely more dangerous. I hope you're ready to be surprised, he said, and was amazed at how his own voice sounded, confident, predatory, utterly certain. Kithara's eyes widened slightly, and her smile became distinctly more respectful. Now you're beginning to sound like your father's son. The next 28 hours were going to change everything Marcus thought he knew about himself. And as he faced off against Kithara in the ship's improvised training space, feeling the blades sing through the air as they began their deadly dance, he couldn't wait to discover what he was truly capable of. Outside the viewports, the stars streamed past like rivers of light, carrying him toward a destiny he'd never known he was born for. Behind them, Earth continued its quiet orbit around an unremarkable star, never knowing that one of its foster children was about to become something the galaxy had never seen before. Something that was both human and Kethvar, both prey and predator, both student and teacher. Something that might just be the key to saving or conquering everything that mattered. The Nexus was even more magnificent and terrifying than Marcus had imagined. As their ship approached the massive fortress city, Marcus pressed his face to the viewport and stared in awe at what had to be the most impressive structure ever created. The Nexus wasn't just built into an asteroid, it had consumed the asteroid entirely, transforming it into something that was part architectural marvel and part living organism. The spires of crystalline coral stretched out from the main body like reaching fingers, each one tipped with what looked like weapon arrays that could level planets. The surface teemed with activity, smaller ships coming and going like insects around a hive, defensive platforms that tracked their approach with deadly precision, and energy shields that shimmered like soap bubbles but were strong enough to stop Star Destroyer-class weaponry. Home, Kithara said simply, standing beside him at the viewport. 3 million Kethvar live and train within those walls. Warriors, strategists, hunters, builders, all united in the pursuit of perfect predation. Marcus could see why his father had been reluctant to leave this place. The Nexus radiated power and purpose in a way that made every human city he'd ever seen look like a child's sandbox construction. This was what a civilization looked like when it was built by and for apex predators. Your father's command ship has docked at the Apex Tower, Zephyr announced from the pilot station. He's requesting permission to meet you in the Great Arena. Marcus felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. After 16 years of separation, he was about to meet his biological father, a man who was legendary even among a species of legendary warriors. What if he was disappointed? What if Marcus didn't live up to his expectations? What if 16 years among humans had made him too soft, too weak, too different? He's nervous, observed the golden-marked female, whose name Marcus had learned was Lyrix. His scent is changing. Marcus had discovered during their journey that the Kethvar had much more acute senses than humans. They could smell emotions, hear heartbeats from across a room, and see in spectrums of light that human eyes couldn't detect. Privacy, as humans understood it, simply didn't exist among people who could read each other's biological responses like open books. It's natural, Kithara assured him. You're about to meet the most important person in your life. But remember, he's been waiting for this moment even longer than you have. Their ship was guided through a docking bay that could have housed a small city, past vessels that ranged from sleek fighters to massive dreadnoughts that looked like they'd been grown rather than built. Everything was larger than human scale, designed for beings who averaged nearly 7 feet in height and were built like predators rather than prey. Marcus had grown during the journey, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. The crash course in Kethvar culture, history, and language had awakened parts of his mind that had been dormant his entire life. He found that he could understand their complex tonal language almost instinctively, that their strategic thinking patterns felt natural rather than alien, and that their approach to problem-solving through calculated aggression made more sense to him than human diplomacy ever had. The training sessions with Kithara had been revelatory. Marcus discovered that 16 years of feeling out of place and restless had actually been 16 years of unconscious preparation. His body moved in ways that felt familiar despite being new. His reflexes were faster than any humans had a right to be, and his tactical thinking operated on levels that surprised even his Kethvar instructors. You fight like someone remembering rather than learning, Lyrix had observed after he'd managed to hold his own against 2 opponents simultaneously. As if your body knows these techniques, but your mind is just catching up. Now, As they disembarked into a docking bay filled with beings who looked like they'd stepped out of his dreams, Marcus felt that same sense of remembering. This place, these people, this culture, it all felt familiar in ways that Earth never had. The delegation waiting for them was impressive, even by Kethvar standards. A dozen warriors in formal ceremonial armor that gleamed with embedded crystals and flowing metal, each one bearing the geometric markings that indicated rank and achievement. But Marcus's attention was immediately drawn to the figure standing at their center. Vexstar was exactly what Marcus had expected, and nothing like he'd prepared for. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with the broad shoulders and lean muscle mass that seemed to be standard among Kethvar males. His skin was darker than Kithara's, marked with silver geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow as he moved. His hair was black, shot through with silver, pulled back in a complex arrangement that showcased the ritual scars along his jawline and neck. His eyes were the same dark brown as Marcus's own, but they held a depth of experience and authority that made Marcus feel like a child by comparison. But it wasn't his imposing physical presence that took Marcus's breath away. It was the expression on his face as their eyes met across the docking bay. For just a moment, the legendary warrior and commander looked like nothing more than a father who had found his lost son. "Marcus," Vexstar said, and his voice carried clearly across the space between them, despite not being raised above a normal speaking tone. Kethvar vocal cords, Marcus had learned, were designed for battlefield communication. Marcus walked towards his father, acutely aware that dozens of eyes were watching his every step. This was his first appearance among his own people, his first chance to prove that he belonged here. Everything about his posture, his movement, his bearing, would be judged and evaluated. Fortunately, the body that had always felt awkward among humans moved with predatory grace among Kethvar. His stride lengthened, his shoulders squared, and his head lifted with unconscious arrogance. By the time he stopped in front of Vexstar, he looked every inch the son of a high commander. They stood facing each other for a long moment, and Marcus realized that this was some kind of formal evaluation. Vexstar was studying him with the same intensity that a general might use to assess a new weapon, looking for strengths, weaknesses, potential. Then Vexstar smiled, and the transformation was remarkable. The stern commander disappeared, replaced by a father who was genuinely proud of what he saw. "You grew up strong," Vexstar said, switching to Kethvar language with its complex tonal variations. "Stronger than I hoped." The humans served their purpose well. Marcus responded in the same language, pleased to discover that the words came easily. "I learned much from them, but I was always ready to come home." The gathered delegation murmured approvingly at his linguistic competence and formal bearing. First impressions were crucial in Kethvar society, and Marcus was apparently making a good one. "Walk with me," Vexstar said, gesturing toward a corridor that led deeper into the Nexus. "We have much to discuss and little time to waste." As they moved through passages that pulsed with organic light, Marcus became aware of the sheer scale of the Nexus. Corridors branched off in all directions, leading to residential areas, training facilities, command centers, and spaces whose purposes he could only guess at. Everywhere they went, Kethvar stopped what they were doing to watch them pass. Word of his return was clearly spreading rapidly through the station. "Tell me about Earth," Vexstar said as they walked. "About the humans who raised you." Marcus thought about David and Lisa Chen, about their patient love and their worried attempts to understand their strange son. "They were good to me, kind, protective, patient. They tried to help me fit in, even when they didn't understand why I couldn't." "Did they know what you were?" "No. They thought I was just different. Anxious, maybe. Or traumatized in some way they couldn't identify." Vexstar nodded. "The cover story we provided suggested that you had been orphaned in a disaster and had selective amnesia. It allowed them to explain any unusual behaviors without questioning your origins too deeply. They passed through a vast atrium where young Kethvar were engaged in what appeared to be combat training. Marcus watched, fascinated, as beings who looked to be his own age moved with speed and precision that would have made Olympic athletes look clumsy. This was what he should have been learning for the past 16 years. What he would have been if his uncle hadn't decided to steal him away. "Do you resent them?" Vexstar asked, following his gaze. "The years you lost?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I resent the separation from you. From this place, from my people. But I don't think the years were entirely lost." "Explain." "Humans approach problems differently than Kethvar. They think in terms of cooperation rather than domination, adaptation rather than conquest. They're prey species, so they've developed survival strategies that predator species wouldn't consider. Beckstar stopped walking and turned to study his son with renewed interest. And you think this gives you an advantage? I think it gives me options, Marcus said carefully. The ability to think like both hunter and prey, to understand both predator and cooperative strategies. In the right circumstances, that might be useful. Indeed it might, Vexstar murmured, and Marcus caught something in his tone that suggested this conversation wasn't as casual as it appeared. Come. There's something you need to see. They took a transport capsule that moved through tubes within the Nexus's living structure, carrying them toward what Vexstar identified as the Strategic Command Center. Along the way, Marcus got glimpses of the station's interior. Vast chambers filled with warriors training for battle, workshops where weapons and armor were grown from living materials, residential areas where families lived and raised the next generation of hunters. The Nexus houses our entire civilization.
Vexstar explained as they traveled.
We are nomadic by nature, following the hunt wherever it leads us. This station is our home, our fortress, and our weapon all in one. It's incredible, Marcus said honestly. I've never seen anything like it. You will help build its successor, Vexstar said, and there was certainty in his voice that made Marcus's pulse quicken. When the time comes to expand our territory again, you will help design and grow a new nexus. But first, you must understand the challenge that faces us. The Strategic Command Center was a massive spherical chamber with displays that showed star charts, fleet movements, and intelligence reports from across HFY territory. Dozens of officers worked at stations that seemed to grow from the floor, their hands interfacing directly with living control systems. At the chamber's center was a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of local galactic space. This is our current territory, Vexstar said, gesturing to a cluster of star systems marked in silver. 300 worlds, all claimed through strength and held through constant vigilance. For 20 years it has been growing steadily as we identify and conquer new targets. He touched a control, and the display changed, showing areas marked in red. But in the past 6 months this has begun to change. Systems on our outer rim have gone dark. Not conquered, not destroyed, simply empty. Marcus studied the display with growing concern. The red zones formed a rough sphere that seemed to be expanding steadily inward toward the heart of HFY territory. What happened to them? We don't know, Vexstar admitted, and the fact that the greatest military mind in HFY history was forced to make that admission was more disturbing than any description of the threat itself. Our reconnaissance fleets report that the worlds are still there, still habitable, but there are no life signs, no energy signatures, no signs of civilization. It's as if entire populations simply vanished. Vexstar manipulated the display again, and now it showed a series of images that made Marcus's blood run cold. Cities that looked like they'd been abandoned in the middle of normal activities. Vehicles stopped in streets, buildings with lights still on, spaceports with ships sitting on landing pads as if their crews had simply walked away and never returned. The first world to go dark was Zirian Prime, Vexstar continued, a HFY colony world with a population of 10 million. They sent their regular status report on schedule, then nothing. When we sent a fleet to investigate 3 days later, they found the world exactly as you see it. Empty but undamaged. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What about the investigation fleet? They landed, conducted a thorough survey, and reported their findings. Then, 12 hours later, they stopped responding as well. When the backup fleet arrived, they found the investigation team's ships sitting empty on the landing pads, exactly as the colonists had left their vehicles in the streets. The implications were staggering. Something was capable of making entire populations disappear without a trace, without violence, without any signs of struggle. And it was moving steadily through space toward the heart of HFY civilization. How many worlds have been affected? Marcus asked. 47, as of this morning's reports, Vexstar said grimly. The rate of expansion is accelerating. At current pace, the phenomenon will reach the Nexus within 8 months. Marcus studied the display, his mind racing. Have you tried communicating with whatever's causing this? We've tried everything, one of the other officers said, approaching with a data crystal in her hand. Communication attempts, warning beacons, automated monitoring stations. Everything either fails to make contact or disappears along with whatever we send. Vexstar accepted the crystal and inserted it into the holographic display. New data appeared, showing energy readings and sensor data from the affected systems. The most disturbing part, he continued, is that we're not the only species being affected. The hegemony, the collective, even the entropy cults, all of them are reporting similar losses on their borders. This isn't an attack on the HFY specifically. It's something that affects all organic life. Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle starting to come together in his mind. You said organic life specifically. Does that mean artificial intelligence is unaffected? Vextar's eyes sharpened. An interesting question. Why do you ask? Because humans have developed extensive AI systems, Marcus explained. Not just computers, but truly intelligent artificial minds. If this phenomenon only affects organic consciousness, he trailed off as the implications hit him. If something was specifically targeting biological life while leaving artificial systems untouched, then humanity's reliance on AI technology might make them uniquely resistant to whatever was happening. You think the humans might be immune? Vextar asked. I think they might be the only species that could investigate this safely, Marcus said slowly. Their AI systems could operate in affected areas without being absorbed or whatever is happening to organic minds. The chamber fell silent as the gathered officers considered this possibility. For a species like the HFY, who solve most problems through the application of superior force and tactics, the idea of relying on a prey species for assistance was almost incomprehensible. There's another consideration, Marcus added reluctantly. If this threat is as existential as it appears, the HFY might need allies rather than just subjects. The humans have resources, technology, and approaches to problem-solving that could be valuable. Vextar studied his son with an expression Marcus couldn't read. You're suggesting we form an alliance with a prey species. I'm suggesting we consider all options before our civilization disappears like those 47 worlds. The other officers shifted uncomfortably at such direct contradiction of their commander, but Vextar seemed pleased rather than offended by his son's boldness. 16 years among humans has given you a very different perspective, he observed. Most HFY would rather die fighting than consider cooperation with lesser species, and if the choice is between cooperation and extinction, then perhaps it's time for the HFY to evolve. Vextar said quietly, You may be exactly what we need, Marcus. Someone who can think like both predator and prey, who understands both conquest and cooperation. He gestured to the display showing the spreading zones of emptiness. This will be your first assignment as my son and heir. Find a way to stop this threat, using whatever resources and allies you deem necessary. Marcus felt the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders like a physical force. His first day back among his people, and he was being handed responsibility for their survival. What authority do I have? He asked. Complete authority, Vextar said simply. You speak with my voice and act with my authority. The entire HFY military is at your disposal, as are our intelligence networks, our technology, and our resources. Marcus nodded slowly, his mind already racing with possibilities. I'll need to return to Earth, to speak with human leadership and explain the situation. Absolutely not, said one of the other officers. The heir to the HFY throne cannot be exposed to such risk. The heir to the HFY throne goes where he deems necessary, Vextar said firmly. If Marcus believes contact with Earth is required, then we will arrange it. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward his father, mixed with the dawning realization that he was about to become the first HFY in history to attempt diplomacy with a species they had always considered prey. I'll need a ship, he said, and a crew that can think beyond traditional HFY approaches. You have them, Vextar assured him. Kithara and her team have requested reassignment to your command. They understand that this mission may require unconventional methods. As Marcus looked around the Strategic Command Center, taking in the faces of officers who had spent their entire lives learning to hunt and conquer, he realized he was about to embark on something unprecedented in HFY history. Not a hunt, not a conquest, but a mission to save his people through cooperation with those they had always seen as inferior. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Marcus felt energized in a way he'd never experienced before. This was what he'd been born for. Not just to be HFY, but to be something new. Something that could bridge the gap between predator and prey, between conquest and cooperation, between the old ways and whatever came next. When do we leave? He asked. Vextar smiled, and for the first time since Marcus had arrived, he looked like a father who was genuinely proud of his son's choices. Immediately, he said. The clock is running, and we have a galaxy to save. The return journey to Earth took on an entirely different character than Marcus's departure. Where his first trip had been about discovery and awakening, this one was about strategy and preparation. The ship Vexstar had assigned to him was larger than Cathara's scout vessel, a diplomatic cruiser designed for extended missions and equipped with communication arrays capable of reaching across star systems. The crew was equally impressive. Along with Cathara, Zephyr, and Lyrix, Marcus now commanded a team of specialists. Xenon, a communications expert who could supposedly learn any language within hours. Thyra, a tactical analyst whose job was to identify potential threats and opportunities. And Corvus, a technology specialist who understood both organic Kethvar systems and the mechanical technologies used by other species. The challenge, Thyra was explaining as they gathered in the ship's briefing chamber, is that humans have no framework for understanding what we are. Their science fiction portrays alien contact as either benevolent mentorship or hostile invasion. They have no cultural concept of apex predators who might be potential allies. Marcus studied the holographic displays showing Earth's political and military structures. The information the Kethvar had gathered about humanity was impressively detailed. Apparently, they'd been conducting passive surveillance for decades as part of their standard evaluation of potential prey species. They're also highly fragmented, Xenon added, his voice carrying the slight accent that indicated he was using translation software to speak English. Over 200 separate nation-states, each with their own governments, militaries, and agendas. There's no single authority we can approach for planetary negotiations. But there are informal power structures, Corvus noted, highlighting several areas on the display. The United Nations provides a forum for global discussion, even if it lacks enforcement authority. And certain nations, the United States, China, Russia, the European Union, have disproportionate influence on global affairs. Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling the ship's organic systems respond to his emotional state. The Kethar approach to diplomacy was straightforward. Identify the strongest leader and either defeat them in combat or negotiate from a position of superior strength. But humans didn't work that way. Their power structures were complex, overlapping, and constantly shifting. We need to approach this differently, he said finally. Humans respond to gradual revelation rather than overwhelming demonstration of power. If we appear suddenly with a massive fleet and demand to speak to their leaders, they'll assume we're invading.
Aren't we? Zephyr asked with genuine confusion.
Ultimately, won't the Kethvar need to establish dominance over human territory to coordinate our defensive efforts? It was a reasonable question from a Kethvar perspective, but Marcus could already see the problems it would create. Not dominance, he said carefully. Partnership. Humans have something we need. AI technology that might be immune to whatever's destroying organic civilizations. But they'll only share it if they see us as allies rather than conquerors. Kythara shifted in her seat, and Marcus caught the scent markers that indicated she was uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. You're asking us to pretend weakness in front of a prey species. That goes against every instinct we possess. I'm asking us to adapt, Marcus replied firmly. The old ways aren't working. If they were, we wouldn't need human assistance to deal with this threat. The truth was, Marcus was struggling with the same instincts. Every time he thought about approaching human leaders as equals rather than subjects, something deep in his Kethvar nature rebelled against the idea. But his human upbringing provided a counterpoint. 16 years of learning that cooperation could be more effective than domination, that strength wasn't always about physical superiority. What's your proposal? Thyra asked, her tone indicating she was willing to listen even if she wasn't entirely convinced. Marcus stood and moved to the display, manipulating it to show a timeline of events. We start small. I returned to my adoptive family first, established that I'm alive and well, but I've been part of a special program. Then I gradually introduced the concept of my true origins and the broader situation. And if they react badly? Corvus wanted to know. Then we adjust our approach. But humans are remarkably adaptable when they understand the stakes. If we can convince them that cooperation serves their own survival interests, they'll work with us. Kithara leaned forward, her predator's eyes studying Marcus with new intensity. You're betting the survival of the Kethvar on your ability to manage prey psychology. I'm betting on human nature being more complex than our initial assessments suggested, Marcus corrected. They're not just prey species, they're survivors. They've faced extinction-level threats before and overcome them through cooperation and innovation. The crew exchanged glances, and Marcus could sense their skepticism. The Kethvar had spent millennia perfecting the art of conquest. The idea of achieving their goals through negotiation and mutual benefit was almost incomprehensible. There's another consideration, he added, playing his strongest card. If this works, if we can establish a genuine alliance with humanity, it changes everything about how the Cathava relate to other species. Instead of just conquerors, we become protectors. Instead of just taking territory, we build coalitions. And why would we want that? Zephyr asked. Marcus gestured to the display showing the spreading zones of empty worlds. Because pure conquest clearly isn't enough anymore. Whatever we're facing, it's bigger than any single species can handle. We need allies, not just subjects. The ship's communication array chimed with an incoming message, and Xenon activated the display. Vexstar's image appeared in the holographic projector, his expression serious. Marcus, he said without preamble, we've received new intelligence about the phenomenon. 2 more worlds went dark in the past 6 hours. Both of them major population centers. The expansion rate is accelerating faster than our projections predicted. Marcus felt his stomach drop. How long do we have? At current acceleration, the phenomenon will reach the outer edges of human space within 4 months. Earth itself will be threatened within 6. The timeline had just become much more urgent. Marcus had been planning on a gradual introduction, carefully building trust and understanding over weeks or months. Now they might have days to convince humanity to join an alliance with an alien species they'd never known existed. I understand, Marcus said. We'll accelerate our contact schedule. Be careful, Vexstar said, and Marcus was surprised by the concern in his father's voice. You're walking into unprecedented territory. No Kethvar has ever attempted what you're trying to do. That's exactly why it might work, Marcus replied. Because no one will expect it. Vexstar's image smiled slightly. Spoken like a true hunter. Your prey never sees the attack they don't anticipate. After the communication ended, the crew sat in contemplative silence. They were 12 hours out from Earth, and Marcus could feel the weight of both species' survival pressing down on him. All right, he said finally. Let's plan this step by step. First, we need to establish my return story. What did you tell your adoptive family about where you were going? Thyra asked. Marcus thought back to that morning at Jefferson High, which felt like a lifetime ago. Nothing. I just left. They probably think I was kidnapped or ran away. Perfect, Kithara said, her strategic mind already working. We can build on that. You were taken by a government agency for testing because of your unusual abilities. They discovered something about your genetics that led to an advanced training program, and now you're being recruited for a special diplomatic mission. Xenon added. It explains your sudden expertise in xenobiology and interstellar politics without revealing the full truth immediately. Marcus nodded approvingly. It was a good cover story, close enough to the truth to be believable, but gradual enough to avoid shocking his human family into panic. What about first contact with official authorities? Corvus asked. We start with people who are already predisposed to believe in extraterrestrial life, Marcus decided. Scientists at SETI, xenobiology researchers, maybe some forward-thinking military officers. Build a foundation of believers before we approach mainstream political leadership. And if they demand proof? Thyra wanted to know. Marcus gestured around the ship's organic interior. We give them proof they can handle. Start with advanced technology, work up to revealing that I'm not entirely human, and eventually introduce the fact that there are entire civilizations out there, including one that needs their help, Zephyr added thoughtfully. Humans seem to respond well to being needed, to having a chance to be heroes. It was a perceptive observation, and Marcus felt a surge of optimism. Maybe his crew was starting to understand human psychology after all. That's exactly right, he said. We present this as an opportunity for humanity to save the galaxy, not as a threat to their independence. The next several hours were spent in detailed planning. They mapped out contact scenarios, developed contingency plans for various responses, and rehearsed their approach until every crew member understood their role in the unprecedented diplomatic mission. As Earth grew larger in their viewports, Marcus found himself thinking about David and Lisa Chen. They'd raised him with love and patience, never knowing they were preparing him for a role that would determine the fate of multiple civilizations. They deserved to know the truth about what their son had become, but they also deserved to have that truth revealed in a way that wouldn't destroy them. Nervous? Kithara asked, joining him at the viewport. Terrified, Marcus admitted. I'm about to attempt something that could either save both our species or start a war that destroys them. You'll succeed, she said with conviction that surprised him. You understand both sides in ways that no pure Kethvar or pure human ever could. That gives you advantages none of us can fully comprehend.
Marcus hoped she was right.
Outside the viewport, Earth's blue marble surface was growing larger, showing the continents and weather patterns of the world that had shaped him for 16 years. Soon he would be walking among humans again, but this time as something completely different. "Contact Earth Traffic Control," he ordered as they entered the outer atmosphere. "Request permission for diplomatic approach to UN headquarters." "Sir," Xenon said from his communication station, "they're demanding identification and authorization codes." "Tell them," Marcus said, feeling the full weight of both his heritages settling on his shoulders, "that Marcus Chen is coming home, and he has something very important to discuss with them." As their ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, its organic hull disguised by holographic projectors to look like advanced but recognizably human technology, Marcus prepared himself for the most important conversation in human history. Behind them, the galaxy continued its inexorable march toward emptiness. Ahead of them, a species that had never known they weren't alone was about to learn that their survival depended on forming an alliance with beings they couldn't have imagined. Marcus Chen, son of two worlds and heir to one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, was about to become the bridge between predator and prey, between conquest and cooperation, between the old universe and whatever came next. The next few hours would determine whether that bridge would hold the weight of two civilizations, or collapse under the pressure of everything humanity in the Kethvar thought they knew about themselves and each other. The United Nations Security Council chamber had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. Marcus stood at the center of the circular room, acutely aware that every eye was fixed on him, with a mixture of fascination, skepticism, and barely contained fear. The holographic display above the table showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with the spreading zones of empty space marked in stark red. Representatives from 15 nations sat around the table, while security personnel lined the bar.